So today we're going to be making a nail header. This will only be the second one of these I've made, but this is a header design that was really popular in the 18th century. It's illustrated in Diderot's French manuscripts, and it consists of a wrought iron body with a high carbon steel lump forge welded on top, and then there's a square hole punched through it, or in this case slightly rectangular. The header we're going to make today is going to have a tiny 1/8 inch hole, but I recommend for an average header for normal sized nails to have a 3/16 square hole, and the hole is going to taper from the bottom, so it'll be wider at the bottom, narrower at the top. There's no hourglass shape to it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to prep the bar of high carbon steel. I've got a piece of 1084, 1080 would be a really good steel to use, and this particular piece is round and it's about 15/16 in diameter, so just under an inch. And I'm gonna make kind of a cone shape on the end. So we're gonna heat that up, and it'll take a minute. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna knock in the corners at a steep angle. This will help prevent fish mouthing, but it also helps me set up for the shape that I want. A little bit of fish mouthing there in the middle. We'll just keep dressing that out as we go. All right, now I'm going to work down a taper, and I'm going to hit it really hard, because the harder you hit, the less fish mouthing. Yeah, that's looking good. I'm going to work down a square taper and then knock off the corners, making it an octagon. This plain 10 series high carbon steel is pretty forgiving, but if you get it to a sparking heat, it's probably ruined. A couple of sparks usually isn't a problem, but if it really starts to spark a lot, then the steel is ruined. All right, we're gonna go back to the end here. So the high dome shape of this header is so that you have plenty of clearance for the hammer when making faceted blows on the nail head. And so that's what I'm doing right now on the end of this piece of steel, is I'm trying to prep the end of the steel to form this shape or something similar. I'm going a little bit smaller because this header we're making is for smaller nails than this one, and because I want to account for any squish that we get while I'm hammering on this during forge welding. These swedges really aren't necessary. This whole step really isn't necessary. So you don't need these to do this, but I want to. All right, it is ready to cut off. So I'm going to take about 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to cut all the way around. All right, that looks like it's a little crooked. Let's see. Yeah, very crooked. So this is our starting stock for the body of the header. It's 6 inches of wrought iron that's about 1 inch in diameter. You could use mild steel. You could use a different shape of bar, a flat bar, square bar, but this is what we've got. So wrought iron should be worked at a very high temperature when you're doing any major movement. This right here is perfect. The surface looks wet. It's sparking a little bit. That's exactly what I want. Tapering the end down a little bit. And then I'm going to flatten this area here just a bit to about that. And right there is where our steel's going to go. All right, now we're going to move to the horn. This draws things out a little bit faster. All right, this handle's a little bit longer than I want, so I'm going to go ahead and cut some off. I'm going to take off 1 inch. All right, there's the handle, and we are ready to do the prep for the forge weld. So we need to file the base of this until this thing sits fairly plumb, not leaning over like it is. But we want the bottom of it to be just a little bit concave, or not concave, convex, so that it doesn't sit completely flat for the forge weld, and that'll cause it to weld in the middle first and squeeze the flux and slag out from underneath it as we hammer down. So that's the idea. It's still really bad. I think we can use that. So the base is not quite flat. It's actually rounded a little bit. It's also important when filing a piece of high carbon steel to make sure that it's not too hard before you file, or you'll trash your file. I did that by letting this air cool instead of quenching it off. And because if I'd quenched it off in water, it would have gotten hard. So I've heated this up, and we're going to flux it in preparation for the forge weld. I usually use borax for forge welding, flux, but I'm using Iron Mountain today, Iron Mountain forge welding flux, which is good stuff. All right, we're going to try to get this centered in here, and I'm actually going to squirt a little extra flux around there, kind of try to hold it steady. I'm not going to arc weld it, but if you wanted to, a tack weld from an arc welder would help keep that from moving. I'm going to set it very carefully in the fire, making sure I've got a good packed bed of coke underneath. Here we go. Let's see. Nope, it moved. All right, we're going to bump that back over and set it. Yeah, it looks good enough. Set it in there like that. And then I'm going to carefully pull coke around it. Actually, I think I'll take the shovel. I just want to make sure that I don't bump that little nubbin of steel because it's just sitting there in position. All right, we're going to bring it to forge welding temperature. Wrought iron forge welds at a much higher temperature than the carbon steel. And the carbon steel, at forge welding temperatures, you're getting really, really close to burning the steel and ruining it. So it's a good situation that our wrought iron's on the bottom and our steel's on the top, and that way we can put a pretty good blast of air to the fire, which will make the iron get hotter quicker than the steel on top, which is perfect. We want that wrought iron basically almost sparking or sparking. And we should be welded. So we will find out the hard way how good this weld is when we go to punch the hole. But it seems to be pretty good. It's hanging on there good while I'm hammering on it. So we're getting ready to punch the hole in the nail header. And it would be much easier to skip punching and drill a hole through on a drill press, an undersized hole, and then drift the hole out hot. But since I'm stubborn, I want to punch it. So I'm going to start my punching with this round punch. It'll just be a little easier. Punch part of the way through, and then I'll finish with this square punch. Square punch has a fairly slim taper. It's 1/8 of an inch at the end because that's the size hole I want to wind up. Normally, as I said earlier, for a normal nail header, 3/16 would be my preferred size. And it tapers too. It's probably a 1/4 inch thick, maybe a little over, 2 inches up the shank. I've got a little dish of coal dust to help keep the punches from sticking, and I've got a water can to cool the punch. The other thing I'll mention is the most aggravating part of this process is because the punches are so thin, they heat up really, really quickly. So the rule here is to take one hit only, one quick hit, before pulling the punch out of the hole and cooling it off. And it will still probably get stuck half the time or more. feel like my hole is off a little bit. Or a little more than a little. All right, well, plan B. So I got the hole off with the dome. It's a little too far toward one end of the header. And while this is less than ideal, I think the way that I will fix it is I'm going to grab a larger punch and I'm going to make this hole a little bigger at the start. And then we'll go back to the small punch and see if we can correct it this way. And if not, we'll have to start over. All right, that may correct it. All right. We may have overcorrected the hole, but I think it'll work. All right. I think we should be ready to drive the punch through. So I've got this little bolster with a slight countersink in it. That is done. That little bit of rag will get filed off the top. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to take a good heat or two, and we're going to clean everything up, touch mark it, and do some hot rasping, because hot rasping is faster than cold filing, and we have a lot of material to move. We'll do some hot rasping, and then we're going to have to let this thing air cool before we can do the final filing. And after the final filing, then we can heat treat it. So it's been 20 or 30 minutes. We let this thing air cool. Had to let it air cool so that it would be soft for filing. Now we're just going to do some quick cleanup. I want to try to make sure that the top of this thing is fairly square. While I don't like my headers to have any hourglass to them, hourglass shape, I do like to bevel these corners a little bit, and that keeps the nail from sticking. All right, so we've got a slight bevel, chamfer, all around these corners, and we are ready to heat treat. So the first step in heat treatment is to heat the steel to the critical temperature for whatever carbon steel you're using, and then let it cool, air cool slowly 3 times. And that's called, each one of those cycles is called normalizing, thermocycling, and that relieves the stresses from forging that are in the steel. And then we'll reheat it to critical temperature and go for the quench to harden. Might be a better idea to use oil, but I'm going to use water. And we'll hope we don't get a crack. So. Okay. Now we're going to polish this off. I'm using a broken piece of grindstone. And I'm watching the colors. And I'm wanting a dark straw color. That went to purple, which is probably okay. I don't want it to go quite that far. All right, we're going to go ahead and cool this off the rest of the way. And we're going to check it with a file just to make sure it's not too hard or too terribly soft. But for a nail header, I don't want it brittle, but I want it pretty hard without being brittle. And I'm pretty sure from experience that this is about right. Now let's make a nail. Beautiful. That's a proper header there.